My name is Sarah and I am 34 years old. I had just dropped our son at school when my phone vibrated with a message that flipped my world upside down. I want a divorce. No call. No face. Just cold text. I opened our joint banking app and froze. The balance was zero. Every cent I saved, earned, and sacrificed was gone. He drained the account in the same minute he hit send. The betrayal burned so deep it felt physical, like steel twisting in my ribs. He thought I was powerless, quiet, replaceable. He didn't know my name was already inked into something bigger, something older, something mine. I wasn't losing a family, I was waking an empire. I stared at those words on my phone longer than any human should stare at something capable of destroying them. 3 lines. No emotion. No preamble. No hesitation on his side. Just. I want a divorce. Don't contact me again. It looked like a sentence. It felt like execution. My thumb didn't move. My breath did, short, uneven, angry. The world around me blurred into meaningless shapes, the coffee mug still warm in my hand, the morning sun wasting its light on a day that deserved none of it, the ticking clock on the wall that seemed to count down something invisible but monumental. I remember thinking one absurd thought first, he didn't even spell check it. Then the next thought hit like a tidal wave, he didn't have to. This wasn't written for love. It was written to end resistance. I dropped the mug. It shattered at my feet. Ceramic explosions have a strange honesty to them, loud, brittle, irreversible. That sound snapped my body into motion when my heart refused to move. I opened our banking app. When the screen loaded, I expected a number. Any number. Even a painfully small one. What I got instead was an emptiness so intentional it felt theatrical. Available balance, $0. 0. Not insufficient funds. Not low balance. Just none. In the same minute his text arrived, he buried our savings like it was evidence, not money. The app even showed the timestamp of the transaction. 6:42 a.m. The exact moment his message hit delivered. It wasn't impulsive. It was synchronized. While I was packing lunches, folding laundry, saving receipt coupons, and mentally calculating our son's graduation expenses like a hopeful idiot, he was moving in the rhythm of someone who had practiced betrayal before performing it. My panic arrived in phases. Phase 1, loss. Every school fee I prepaid. Every holiday we postponed so the future could breathe easier. Every sleepless night I worked freelance contracts while he pretended to snore beside me, gone. Phase 2, anger. My pulse thundered in my ears. My fists clenched. My teeth hurt from pressure, not sugar. My entire nervous system wanted to punch a wall or his face, whichever appeared first. Phase 3, clarity. The anger sharpened into something colder, heavier, denser. Rage turned into architecture. Pain converted into blueprint. I didn't scream yet. I went silent. Silence is underestimated by the loud. That's why the loud lose to it. I checked the transfer details. The recipient name was weirdly generic, almost intentionally forgettable. Safe Harbor Holdings. A shell name wearing sunglasses. You don't scrub a bank transfer name unless you fear the person reading it might track it back to a throat worth cutting. Offshore accounts don't scare me. Hidden ones do. I called the bank's support line. The woman on the other side used the kind of calm corporate tone meant to soothe hurricanes. We're sorry to inform you that the transaction cannot be reversed without a law enforcement request or a court order, ma'am. She said ma'am like I was just inconvenienced. I told her I wasn't inconvenienced. I was robbed. And he was stupid enough to timestamp it. She finally paused. The kind of pause people give you when they realize you're not crying, you're calculating. She forwarded me to the fraud department. The man there asked me procedural questions. I gave him procedural answers. But even he could feel something burning under the floorboards. Do you have proof this was unauthorized? Oh, I have better, I said. I have motive, timing, intent, and a husband who believes women collapse instead of counterattack. He asked one more question, nervously casual. So what will you do now, Miss Sarah? I looked at the shattered ceramic pieces at my feet, then out the window like I could already see the future lining up into war columns for me. And I answered truthfully. The message was the first move. But I don't think he understands games where the second player wins. The phone line went quiet again. Because even strangers can recognize when the story shifts from tragedy to blood debt. My husband sent a text to end a marriage. He sent a transfer to end my security. He didn't know what else he sent. A signal. A flare. A declaration that finally gave me permission to stop pretending I was afraid. Because fear is what you feel before you realize you're the consequence. And I had just realized it. The first breadcrumb appeared like a whisper in a hurricane, a deleted transfer recipient labeled only as Safe Harbor Holdings. He had thought erasing it would bury the truth. Instead, it became a neon arrow pointing straight at his arrogance. The kind of arrogance only someone who's never met their match would wear. I called my lawyer. Not the one I married, who smiled at my anxiety like it was cute. I called the one my mother had whispered about when I was 16, the one who specialized in offshore crimes, financial labyrinths, and unraveling schemes rich men believed were invisible. He answered immediately, like he was expecting me. Maybe he was. Sarah, he said, voice low, measured. This isn't a marital dispute. This is a conspiracy in motion. Do you understand what you're holding? I understand more than he does, I replied. Together, we traced the routing code of the transfer. It pinged through 3 different banks before landing in a Caribbean clearinghouse, a place notorious for shell companies and secret accounts. Every digital hop was intentional, like steps in a dance I had just learned. My stomach twisted, not in fear, but in anticipation. Fear would have slowed me, this rush made me dangerous. I started compiling every scrap of data he didn't delete. Screenshots, timestamps, location tags, device logs, each one a nail in the coffin of his assumed invisibility. He had underestimated me, like every predator underestimates the prey that learns the terrain. Then came the realization, this wasn't just theft. It was rehearsal. If he could drain a joint account while keeping it clean on paper, what else could he orchestrate when someone didn't notice? I imagined a line of ex-spouses or partners, all victims of quiet financial annihilation. And if I was just one stop on that list, the next move could have been fatal. I gathered the files, encrypted them, and saved them in 3 separate digital vaults. Each folder contained evidence that could freeze the assets of any entity involved. The law might move slow, but numbers don't lie. They speak in evidence. And evidence is louder than tears. Even as I worked, I felt it, the shadows outside. Cars parked too long at the curb. Figures lingering at a distance when they thought I wasn't looking. My heart skipped in calculated beats. I wasn't scared. I was aware. And awareness is more dangerous than panic. I went back through our bank messages. He had left traces, metadata, timestamps, logs that no ordinary eye would notice. But I wasn't ordinary. Every tap, every confirmation code was a breadcrumb. And each breadcrumb was a road leading somewhere he hadn't imagined, into my hands. Then the question hit me like a hammer, if he can orchestrate this, who else is involved? Who taught him these moves? Who expected him to succeed? The thought made my blood hum. I had to uncover the network before it noticed me. Before they realized I wasn't just reacting, I was planning. I filed inquiry requests to banks and intermediaries, citing suspicious transactions, pointing to inconsistencies. The emails and legal requests I sent carried the weight of a warning. You've underestimated the person you've chosen to hurt. And then came the first real confirmation that I wasn't alone. A name popped up in one of the correspondence threads. Not his. Not mine. Someone higher up, someone whose fingerprints were smeared across every transaction. A person who would notice me poking into their empire. Someone with reach. I closed my laptop slowly, my mind racing. This was no longer about a husband. This was about a system. A machine. And now, I had pulled the first lever. Somewhere, someone was about to notice my signature. Somewhere, someone was going to regret it. And the real game hadn't even begun. I thought betrayal was personal until paranoia made it communal. When you get divorced by text and robbed by bank transfer in the same minute, you expect villains to wear faces you already recognize. Husbands. In-laws. A mistress. A bad lawyer. Something human, something emotional, something loud. What arrived instead was structural, quiet, coordinated, disciplined, like a project plan disguised as heartbreak. I confronted his mother without scheduling it first. Powerful schemes depend on predictable moves, and unpredictability is where their architecture cracks. I showed up at her door at 8:03 a.m., still carrying the smell of broken ceramic and boiling fury. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. That already told me too much. Did he send you? I asked immediately. No, she said. But someone else might. Her hands trembled. Not the tremble of guilt, but the tremble of someone who has lived their entire life adjacent to people who don't fail because they don't improvise. The kind of people who file divorce papers like memos and drain bank accounts like an afterthought. She stared past me, toward the street, like she was calculating sightlines instead of apologies. You think this is revenge, she whispered, but this is recognition. They don't watch heartbreak. They watch deviation. That sentence dropped colder than any divorce text could. Systems don't care about tragedy. They care about disruption. I stepped closer. Who is they? She closed her eyes, exhaled slow, then broke rule number 1 in every secret family empire. She told the truth when fear outranked loyalty. There are families in the world who don't announce power, she said softly. They audit it. When someone underneath them steals, they expect the victim to fold, vanish, or fight badly. The moment someone fights well, someone above the thief gets alerted. I realized then the hierarchy. My husband drained the account. Someone else monitored the drain. Not for cleaning up his crime, but to confirm it succeeded in silencing me. Why are you telling me? I asked. Because whoever told him you were alone, she said, was wrong. And now he has notified them. Notified. Not threatened. Not impressed. Notified. The worst verb to hear when you want a quiet life. I felt a shift in the air behind me. A car behind the street hedge, idling too long to be pedestrian. A black sedan reflecting nothing but intention. I don't even know the model. When people watch you intelligently, brand names stop mattering and silhouettes begin. That car didn't care about my day. It cared about my direction. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I waved. Not politely. Almost theatrically. The kind of wave that says, I see you, now you must see me. His mother went pale. You think you're leveraging them by noticing them, she said, voice tightening, but you're inviting their participation. Participation. Another word harsher than divorce. But she was wrong about my intent. I wasn't inviting their participation in my fear. I was inviting their participation in their exposure. I walked back to my car slowly, deliberately crossing their field of view once more, like bait walking across a camera frame. My legal case needed proof of surveillance. If someone was watching me, intimidation could become conspiracy evidence. Shadows are only dangerous when undocumented. I intended to document. My lawyer always said, a powerful enemy is harmless until the court can pronounce their name. I sat in the car, locked the doors, and exhaled for the first time today in something resembling fear. But only for a moment. Because fear is transition energy. It is fuel or break depending on who learns it first. And I had just learned it. I dialed my attorney again. Part 3 of the war just arrived at my sidewalk, I said. He paused. Another 5-second silence. People keep going silent around me today for the same reason artillery waits before firing. Then he asked. Did the car leave or stay? Oh, it stayed, I said. That means someone expected me to disappear. And someone else needs to know I didn't. He exhaled slow. Then bury floral grief and sharpen your filings, Sarah. The enemy list might be longer than the account damage. I closed my eyes, replaying the words. Divorce. Theft. Observation. Recognition. Participation. A domino line built by someone who has always believed the first player wins. But dominoes don't fall forward if you kick the table from the other side. He thought he erased my security by emptying the account. What he actually did was confirm to someone smart that I existed and might fight back. Which means a bigger player just pulled up a chair, opened a file, and wrote a question mark beside my name. And if a stranger fears your next move more than your husband feared losing you, then the story isn't ending. It has just acquired budget. I used to believe photos carried memories. Now I know better. Photos carry evidence. Especially the ones someone screenshots instead of downloads, edits instead of archives, and wipes location data from as if joy itself had committed a crime. He cleaned our bank balance to zero thinking money was the weapon. But you don't choreograph a financial execution without rehearsing your alibi in pixels first. The morning after the text, I logged into our cloud storage. He didn't revoke my access. Not because he forgot. But because he assumed I'd never scroll far enough to matter. That assumption became his second mistake. The first album looked boring. Holidays. Birthdays. Graduation photos from years before. Standard sentimental camouflage. But then I noticed the pattern. Every travel image had its location tag manually removed. Not automatically. Manually. A man who cuts metadata with intent is practicing the same muscle he uses to move invisible money. Then came the screenshots. Not the mugshots of love. The photos of process. Transfers photographed on his phone screen. Bank approvals saved as images instead of documents. Caribbean routing codes captured in fragments. Passports lying open on a contract desk. Offshore stamps scattered like confetti from a celebration no one invited me to. Each screenshot was deliberate minimalism. Just enough saved to confirm success. Just enough erased to deny liability. But nothing screamed louder than the folder with the reverse text caught by reflection off a glass table. Not plain English. Not printed font. Mirrored evidence. I zoomed in until the blur formed letters. A consortium name written in reverse ink on a folder facing the sky. Helios Bank Consortium. I whispered it aloud the same way you whisper a final boss title before your health bar starts shaking. My lawyer had told me powerful men hide mistresses. Extremely powerful men hide institutions. If a joint account drain funded an apparatus this polished, this timed, this concealed, then either I married a pawn executing instructions, or a prince defending someone else's throne. Both bleed when toppled. The difference is who tries to stop the bleeding first. I checked the reflection image again. There were IDs scattered across the desk. 2 passports. An offshore stamp I couldn't quite identify. A contract header blurred but formatted like corporate scripture. Every sheet was facing the room, not the camera. Except one envelope slightly ajar. Inside it, a clearance card embossed with a solar emblem. Not to display power. to authenticate obedience. He wasn't collecting memories. He was collecting jurisdiction immunity and corporate oversight approval in decorative picture format. I felt betrayal in stereo now. Left speaker, a husband who believed humiliation would mute me. Right speaker, a network that erased its face but not its footprint. I scrolled deeper. There was a vacation album labeled Work Trip, Dubai 2023. But none of the images were Dubai. The skyline was intentionally blurred. Every window reflection scrubbed. Every angle optimized to hide context instead of show it. But he forgot the footprint in the image most people never check unless war has already begun. A reflection. A fleeting mirrored name on a glass table. A consortium folder most likely facing the most important person in the room. Not him. Not me. Someone else. If he danced this smoothly through international transfers, a legal filing template, and picture-based alibi storage pipelines, then heartbreak wasn't the objective. Secrecy was the client. And he was the contractor. What level of life was he shielding from me, and for whom? I felt my pulse tighten again. This twist wasn't emotional. It was logistical. If shells hide billionaires, then pebbles are meaningless until the water level drops. My husband dropped the water level himself. Which means someone in a position higher than heartbreak had just realized that I was reading images meant to stay unread, scrolling folders meant to stay unscrolled, and touching data meant to stay mirrored, not mined. I closed the laptop slowly, like someone shutting a vault door for the first time. Love blinds you to pixels. Divorce cures digital naivety. And I had just been cured. But cures have side effects. And the side effect approaching fast was recognition I never asked for, by eyes I couldn't see, tied to a name now staring back at me in mirrored text. I wasn't chasing a husband anymore. I was chasing architecture. Because marriage made me soft. But evidence made me dangerous. And somewhere, someone was about to ask the same question I asked myself that morning at his mother's door. Who exactly is Sarah, and how much filing authority does she actually have? People imagine mistresses were perfume, jealousy, and claw marks. The woman in his screenshots wore spreadsheets, secure routing knowledge, and operational calm. I found her name after sifting through his chat backups. Not labeled love, not stored in the romantic folders, not hidden behind hearts or pet names. Just 4 sterile characters sitting in a thread of scheduled messages. Maya R. No flirtation. No affair theatrics. No stolen emotional dialogue. Their communication read like logistics, not longing, timed check-ins, structured file exchanges, direct coordination packets. Approval messages delivered like deployment updates. She wasn't stealing my husband. She was allocating him. That stung in a different way. Deeper. More insulting. More lethal. Divorce texts are loud. Institutional obedience is quiet. I didn't confront her immediately. First, I created an anonymous email alias, boring, procedural, corporate, forgettable. The same design language they trusted. Powerful networks don't fear emotion. They fear patterns that resemble their own. I sent one line to her inbox. Safe Harbor Holdings transfer, confirm recipient jurisdiction. I expected a block, a denial, or an insult. Instead, I received diplomacy. Her reply arrived 18 minutes later. Concise. Professional. Too immediate to be coincidence. Withdraw. This isn't romance. This is architecture. No threats. Just a procedural warning. I leaned back in my chair. If a woman inside the system warns you instead of mocking you, it means the system fears your interference more than it enjoys its success. I typed back, maintaining anonymity. Architecture collapses with enough pressure. Her second silence hit longer than the first. Exactly 31 seconds. A silence measured not by thought, but by risk assessment. Then she said the line that served as timestamp of hierarchy. Some collapses bury the wrong people first. The threat wasn't personal. It was directional. That means the players had tiers above him, above her, above me, all monitoring deviation. Approval flows like air traffic control for secrets. But I had leverage she didn't consider. I don't care about shame. I care about jurisdiction. And jurisdiction cracks when documentation shifts elevation. I logged the email exchange as discovery evidence. Metadata tracking digital intent. Even email dialogue carries packet routing proof. She assumed I needed refund. Refunds are for victims who want their old life back. I wanted something different. I wanted his next life unreachable. I checked her professional footprints. She wasn't messy. Vetted degrees. Offshore routing fluency. Institutional clearance level grammar. Public identity tied to a corporate compliance firm but personal access through secure interbank routing knowledge nodes. The kind of woman companies send to negotiate with governments instead of texting husbands. She thought the drained account was the end of a chapter for me. It was a chapter audit for her. Because the bank transfer didn't scare her enough to silence me. But my email signature pattern labeled her frightened enough to respond. Which means someone was paying her to watch disaster, not cause it. And now the disaster had responded to her back channel of fear. She probably expected hysterical confrontation. She got calculated inquiry. And inquiry is more expensive than divorce. I opened the cloud album again. One document listing job titles. Her name next to. White heavy checkmark consortium risk mediation lead. White heavy checkmark secondary partner allocation strategist. Secondary partner. Not romantic classification. Operational role. She didn't win a man. She won a seat holding a stopwatch, watching someone else's operation succeed while preparing to intercept disaster signatures that might disrupt routing secrecy. I realized this wasn't a love triangle. This was a chain of command. He text divorced me thinking shame would collapse my voice. She email warned me thinking intelligence might collapse my courage. A bigger system was assuming I'd collapse by noon. Noon came and went. I kept standing. But her threat still lurked like a question dangling from an encrypted ping. If Maya answers me this quickly, who is about to answer her? Because emotion moves in minutes. But institutions move in notifications. And I had just triggered one. Not with shouting. Not with tears. But with signed inquiry deviation. She thought she orchestrated silence underneath him. What she didn't know was. Silence beneath me has always been planned for empire, not obedience. Inquiry beneath her is documentation feeding someone above them both. Someone above them both was not prepared for someone like me acquiring procedural momentum. I waited for the third email. Not from a husband. Not from Maya. But from someone whose job was fear management when shells start cracking. And the countdown had already begun the moment she hit reply instead of delete. Divorce papers look heavy. They feel heavier when you realize they were the cleanest thing in the room. My lawyer filed the marital dissolution verification first. It was airtight, legally precise, emotionally empty, procedurally clean. No contestable language. No filing date irregularities. No jurisdictional loopholes that could help me claw the marriage back even if I wanted to. Which told me one truth immediately. They weren't protecting the marriage. They were protecting the method. Because powerful men don't mind messy love stories. Powerful networks mind messy documentation. The theft case, though? That was fertile soil for consequence. I opened every clause tied to joint financial assets, furious but forensic in approach. Asset theft statutes carry a special kind of clarity. Was intent proven? Was access shared? Was damage recorded? Was concealment deliberate? Deliberate? Yes. But then came the ugly little technical snake hiding behind the routing code like an umbrella protecting more than rain. Financial damage implicated more than one party. My lawyer said the sentence cautiously. Sarah, this isn't one man draining $87,000. This is someone using a template theft method tied to corporate routing with stakeholder oversight. We're not filing against a husband. We might be filing against a structure. I let that sentence settle without flinching. Structures don't scream. Structures collapse when you find load-bearing walls. I had built resentment with my husband thinking he was the villain. Now I realized he was more like a courier carrying out instructions using timing scripts, templated emotional cutoff text, and rehearsed digital wiping intuition flows. He didn't write that message to hurt me emotionally. He wrote it to erase jurisdictional contestation. Because divorce was the emotional blindfold. The transfer was the real objective. I felt something shift internally, a kind of betrayal behind betrayal that smells metallic instead of personal. If he used white heavy checkmark a templated divorce delivery method. White heavy checkmark synchronized bank transfer timing. White heavy checkmark picture format evidence storage. White heavy checkmark metadata scrubbing practice. Then love wasn't the narrative. I was the variable in someone else's workflow. The workflow was designed by someone who believed. The husband empties. The wife folds. Jurisdiction stays quiet. Shells stay dark. The era continues. But he didn't know. Some wives come from vault-adjacent families that don't roar their surnames until signatures light up like beacons. And Helios Bank Consortium lit up the moment I traced its reflection in a screenshot he never thought I'd magnify. My lawyer dug deeper into the theft statute implications. Financial conspiracy breaks differently at every elevation. At the lowest tier, it looks like a drained marriage account. At the next tier, it looks like offshore routing concealment. But at the next tier above that? It starts looking like institutional audit deviation. Institutions don't fear stolen money. They fear discovery by someone who has the filing authority to drag shell names into Judge Light. Which means someone choreographed this because someone needed to see if my opposition could be routed into silence. I thought my husband ended us. Now I know better. He just hit send on a system that wasn't prepared for a recipient who reads like a participant, not a casualty. My advisors were stunned at the size of complication. Consortium crimes mean consortium enemies. So I asked the most important strategic question I had asked since the coffee mug shattered that morning. If we're not filing against a man anymore, then who exactly learns we exist when the filing begins? My lawyer exhaled quietly. Audibly. Like he was opening a document cabinet instead of closing one. That's the risk, Sarah. The first filing might trigger retaliation from stakeholders who believed you weren't above audit threshold to matter. I laughed softly. Not emotional laughter. Calculated laughter. Because stakeholders only contact you when they fear exposure. They respect demolition authority. They were not prepared for the deviation to have a name you actually own. And my deviation had become more interesting than the divorce they scripted to blind me. This was no longer family drama. This was jurisdictional elevation warfare. I wasn't trying to rescue a marriage anymore. I was preparing to drag a system into public hearings by using the one thing systems respect more than broken hearts. Procedural momentum. But momentum cuts like a sword without prejudice. It can chop off your enemy's future. It can summon enemies bigger than the one you already hate. Which means the third voice wasn't coming to negotiate yet. It was coming to recognize who interrupted their expected silence. And the question mark beside my name didn't ask if I'd fight. It asked, who exactly authorized me to read architecture through mirrored text, and how deep does her filing authority go? Because here's the cruelty of institutional betrayal. They didn't just want divorce from me. They wanted distance from investigation. And investigation was exactly what I had begun. Which means, somewhere in an office that knows more than heartbreak. Someone had already received a notification. Recipient did not fold. But recipient folding is the drama you expect. Notification is the drama you don't see coming. And I was about to find out who owned the sending server. People think trauma lives in screaming. Mine lived in paperwork moving faster than panic. After the bank told me reversal required law enforcement, and after Maya warned me like a woman trained to intercept risk, there was only one escalation remaining before institutions started fearing signatures instead of people. A forensic attorney. Not a divorce lawyer. Not a family mediator. Not someone who carries tissues. Someone who carries jurisdiction collapse strategy. So I placed the call. I didn't scroll Google. I didn't ask friends. I didn't vet reviews. I dialed the number my mother once whispered about in the same tone you use when describing something too sharp for children but too protective to ignore. The call connected to Victor Hale. His greeting wasn't soft. "It's early for surrender," he said. I blinked. Who said anything about surrender? He exhaled through the receiver like someone closing a file with finality. "Then it's early for war calls." "I didn't call for war," I corrected him. "I called for ledger forensic surgery." He already declared the war by text. He mailed the theft with a timestamp. "I'm just asking who signs the response." Victor paused. Silence is universal among lawyers when they realize a client doesn't want custody, they want catastrophic exposure authority. But his silence held something else underneath it. Familiarity. Not the familiarity of past marriage. The familiarity of past surname verification. "You're asking the wrong first question," he said finally. "You're not hunting where the money routed. You're hunting who got alerted when the route completed." He was right. But I still wanted to hear it formally, the way judges want sentences formally written. "What alerted you when I called?" I asked him. What followed was the first recognition fracture. "Before we talk theft, tell me your maternal surname." My maternal surname? The one no one in my husband's office ever asked about? The one that had never mattered at school, or banks, or rent, or humiliation moments. I hesitated for 2 seconds. Just 2. Enough for him to register that the question hit the architecture instead of the emotion. "Hale," I said softly. "My mother was Evelyn Hale before marriage." He tapped something on his keyboard. I heard it. Those tiny mechanical clicks that don't sound decisive until you realize they can activate clearance pipelines invisibly. A verification ping popped through a legacy corporate database held by Orion Registry Authority. Then Victor said the sentence that detonated perspective. "Your divorce didn't trigger monitoring. Your transfer dispute didn't trigger monitoring. What triggered monitoring was a lineage echo match recognized by an inactive diplomatic arbitration dictionary used by consortium investors. The moment your surname matched a dormant shareholder verification pool, it lit up a routing flag inside their system, not yours." I felt my stomach drop but my pulse sharpen. "So," I whispered, "the fact that I married someone who thought I was alone was irrelevant until my surname was alone on a digital routing confirmation log?" "Precisely," Victor said. "She'll fold unless the surname logs higher than the husband." Which told me the quiet horror. They didn't rob a defenseless wife. They robbed someone whose maternal surname once co-owned telecom routing contracts auditing international transactions before encryption frameworks even existed. But my family abandoned that legacy intentionally and went quiet decades ago. Quiet legends are safe until someone forces them to roar. But sometimes they don't roar first. They file. Victor was watching me carefully now. He had stopped talking like a forensic attorney and started talking like a man trying to identify blast radius. You don't reverse a transfer by complaining. You reverse it by escalating routing authority inside a hostile supervisory ecosystem. Systems don't collapse when emotions flare. They collapse when signatures demonstrate legal transformation reach. Then he said one more line that made my gums ache with cold fear clarity. Somewhere inside that consortium server banking tree, someone is no longer protecting the theft. They are protecting the original routing jurisdiction owner of your surname's clearance tree. Because if you have audit naming rights, you might have naming detonation rights. I half laughed. So, Victor, I said slowly, we're not recovering money. We're establishing hierarchical filing elevation rights and testing how the system reacts when an audit ghost finally learns it can authenticate back. He didn't laugh back. Good lawyers don't laugh when litigation sounds like warfare. Great lawyers don't laugh when surnames sound like nuclear authorization codes. I was raised to believe names don't matter, I told him. He replied. Names matter most when the world wants you to believe they don't. Which means the breadcrumb wasn't the stolen balance. It was the system watching the stolen balance succeed in silencing spouses who weren't registry echoes. But I was. And I had just forced a system to remember a name it thought stayed buried. So now the real question wasn't where the money went. It was, who exactly was about to receive the follow-up audit ping now that the ghost of my surname had woken? Because I wasn't filing against a husband anymore. I was filing into a system that had just discovered it accidentally bit into a bloodline that carries more authority than heartbreak. And systems don't tremble when you fight them. Systems tremble when the wrong person doesn't vanish quietly after being deleted from their story. Which means someone far above divorce text level was about to ask for legal mediation before I could even hit sync inquiry next on my own evidence folder. But mediation only happens when the person being audited doesn't know whether the auditor was born to collapse the empire or collect it. And I think, somewhere in that system, someone had just realized the auditor shared their last name with the lawyer I had just called. And that was mistake number 3. The kind you notice only when the surgeon's surname is also the hidden door the thief never thought to lock. We think inheritance arrives in envelopes. Mine arrived in protocol. Authentication. Permission that was never meant for me to touch, but was never removed from my access. Victor Hale didn't hand me hope, he handed me a mirror and asked me to look at myself without the filter of middle-class survival mode I had worn like cheap clothing for 34 years. After our call, he initiated a back-channel lookup into a private trust verification node run through Astrius Trust Archive. 30 seconds later, my email chimed. Not from the bank. Not from my in-laws. Not from Maya. From an institution that doesn't speak casually to people unless that person has accidentally touched the edge of something old enough to destabilize boardrooms. Notice of beneficiary clearance activation. I frowned. Clearance? Beneficiary? Activation? These words felt militaristic and unfriendly. I didn't know what they meant yet, but I knew this: nobody activates clearance for pocket change. I printed the notice, then followed its appended code into a biometric vaulthouse directory owned by Ardent Vault Systems. It asked for biometric confirmation. Not fingerprint. Retinal scan. A man rehearsed in theft only scrubs location tags on vacation photos. A man rehearsed by institutions creates surveillance-dependent jurisdiction illusions. I held my breath as the green scanning light reflected across my iris. The system authenticated me instantly. No flags. No delays. No secondary verification stage. I expected a dashboard, a form, or an instruction. Instead, it opened into a ledger portfolio vault, not a savings account. Not pesos. Not dollars. Not euros. Arteries. The kind of assets that don't sit in accounts, they sit in ecosystems, cross-jurisdiction securities, old telecom routing points, maritime supply pathways, silent shareholder ownership in distribution backbones powering encrypted bank-to-bank transit frameworks. I scrolled slowly. Each asset carried Jurisdiction tags. Shell Corporation access charts. Dormant injunction activation rights. Consortium-level mediation override capabilities. Shareholder freeze authority toggles. And remediation protocols bolded last signer priority. Then one file sat heavier than all others, a beneficiary contract addressed to my maternal surname's legacy clearance tree. Filed in 1999 by an invisible shareholder surnamed Hale. The signature belonged to my late uncle, whose company was absorbed decades ago into a digital clearinghouse so secret it doesn't sit online where casual browsing reaches. Celestine Clearinghouse. I leaned back, heart pounding in two frequencies at once. Grief over who hid this from me. Rage over who assumed the vault stayed dormant. This portfolio wasn't ordinary. It wasn't sentimental. It wasn't designed to deliver wealth. It was designed to deliver leverage. The kind wealthy consortiums fear when it shifts to the person they tried to silence using stolen marriage pretext. Victor had said it clearly. Money theft is motive. But genomic clearance lineage is weapon authorization. I didn't inherit a balance. I inherited pressure points. And the attorney was right about something chillingly precise. The vault file didn't contain instructions on how to silently collect money. It contained instructions on how to silently stop someone else from collecting anything ever again. The worst part? My uncle had never planned to give this to me for revenge. He had planned to give it to me for safety if someone ever stole from me, believing I had no interbank jurisdiction elevation rights. But even safety protocols carry collateral damage clauses. Right arrow recognition begins retaliation. Detonation attracts stakeholders. Stakeholders. The same word that made his mother tremble. Stakeholders implies investors that don't exist publicly. Legal teams that don't file until exposed. Auditors that don't ask questions without clearance privileges. And retaliation budgets infinitely larger than robbed household savings. I swallowed hard. If this vault authenticated under my eyes permission tree, then my divorce didn't wake panic. It woke investors' attention. Because only one type of person gets offered mediation before litigation from offshore routing syndicates. The one who can sign a judgment capable of freezing infrastructure they once quietly co-owned by birthright. I wasn't fighting for my savings anymore. I was fighting for narrative elevation over a man who didn't understand that some names look invisible not because they lack power, but because nobody has forced the system to authenticate them loudly enough to be recognized. My vault file had just performed that authentication on my behalf. Now, the legal chessboard had changed shape entirely. Not heartbreak revenge. Not marriage dissolution. Not even fraud recovery. This was no longer the story of a wife robbed by text. This was the story of an auditor accidentally promoted mid-divorce into jurisdictional priority elevation that could financially amputate a prince or collapse a consortium. But promotion always has audit witnesses. And witnesses always file back questions when the wrong person climbs quickly enough to threaten their secrecy shelters by merely existing and staying too intelligent to vanish. I whispered the only correct procedural answer. Sync inquiry initiated. But before the sync completed, the better question was already pulling up in the background like a shareholder packet routing confirmation waiting for signatory acknowledgement. Who else just learned I could collapse systems with filing rights they never knew were mine? Because now, there was a new danger I didn't see coming. Not losing money. Not losing marriage. Not surveillance. Not Maya. The moment a trust recognizes you before you recognize yourself, nobody inside that system sits comfortably again until they learn whether you're a beneficiary or a trigger. And I had just realized. The vault didn't open because my husband stole. The vault opened because someone above him just learned they might regret assuming my signature stayed inactive. Which means the first offering of interbank mediation isn't coming from heartbreak level. It's coming from the level where systems fear what the auditor might want to name next. And the vault warned me clearly. Recognition doesn't mean refuge. It means you survived the deletion stage. Now the system wants to know how much damage you can technically authorize back by signature priority elevation. I closed the file slowly, placed the printed notice into my personal safe, and exhaled. Because inheritance rights don't scream. They wait for opposing investor signatures to tremble first. And someone was about to tremble. But the trembling wouldn't arrive by romance or text. It would arrive by negotiation packet asking not whether I lost an account, but whether I could delete their secrecy structures by legal movement. And I intended to find out. Who thought this vault would never open under my eye? And how much do they stand to lose now that it has? If discovery is a slap, lineage acknowledgement is a subpoena delivered to your own self-image. I walked into the next family meeting not with questions, but with a trust emblem printed on paper and burned into my eyes' authentication logs. I expected comfort. I received protocol shock. My uncle Jamal was the first to recognize the emblem, and recognition always sounds different when fear outranks nostalgia in the room. He didn't exhale like a proud relative. He exhaled like someone who knows what it means to accidentally signal institutions that don't like being signaled. Sarah, he said slowly, you walked into an investor surname protocol cluster. My cousin Aisha blinked at me. A what? Jamal tapped the symbol with his finger like it might come alive if named fully aloud. This emblem belongs to a dormant beneficiary clearance pool. One tied to old telecom routing infrastructure, maritime securities, and injunction priority elevation rights stored in trusts, not accounts. I swallowed. Joint accounts can be drained without news. Trusts can't be poked without alert trees flowering like sirens. So you knew? I asked him. Not about the theft. About the system. About the hierarchy. About the fact that my silence was trained, not weak. He nodded, jaw tightening. Your mother made us swear nobody would ever activate the registry sequence unless you were in danger someone ordinary couldn't see. I was in danger, I said coldly. They just didn't realize it was theirs yet. That stunned silence hit the room like a stamp falling on legal approval parchment. Because now they all realized what I had just realized 30 minutes earlier in the vault room. My filing authority lived higher than the house life I had worn like costume cheap enough to abandon. My cousin Aisha whispered, so what now? Now? I said. Now, he learns the real damage wasn't the money he stole. It was the name he activated by accident. Jamal leaned in close. Not familial intimacy. Litigation proximity. You don't understand, he said softly. The theft wasn't the test. I frowned. Then what was? The divorce text was the distraction layer. The transfer was the activation token. The surveillance was confirmation. But the real test was whether your surname sat high enough on the registry to matter to the wrong institution when the shell cleared. I leaned back. You're telling me the world wasn't watching whether I'd fight for a husband or refund an account? He nodded slowly. They were watching whether you'd fold before the surname ping returned audit priority elevation status. And you didn't fold. I smiled. Which made Jamal shiver. Because smiles don't scare predators. Controlled elevation does. If the consortium stole from me, he said, they didn't expect anyone above you to object. Oh, they will now, I said firmly. Not because I needed protection, but because I just proved someone has to fear my next filing more than their secrecy clauses protected his behavior. Then came the shock I wasn't prepared for, the deeper twist hiding under all inheritance fault theatrics. A sealed manila packet delivered minutes earlier to my uncle's home office address. The letter header. Helios Arbitration Board. Not my husband's name. Not Maya's name. Not even my lawyer Victor's name. But a consortium mediation council whose grammar smelled like fearful respect. My cousin opened it carefully like someone checking landmine wiring instead of family mail. Inside it. Request for primary beneficiary injunction access mediation with Mrs. Sarah Hale. Primary beneficiary. Not spouse. Beneficiary first chair priority elevation acknowledgement. The room went cold. Because acknowledgement means the consortium now knows they stole from someone with elevated audit override rights. They don't fear my heartbreak, they fear my injunction naming authority. They want mediation before I name a shell recipient freeze that could collapse assets beyond my savings, beyond divorce, beyond humiliation, beyond Maya's professional carriage dependency, beyond everything. My Uncle Jamal whispered. They realized they have leverage problem. I crossed my arms. Good, I replied softly. Because leverage problems are the only problems that make institutions talk before I finish naming the filing. My cousin whispered. But Sarah, now they're scared you might have the infrastructure collapse signature. They're watching carefully. What if they want to verify whether your identity as beneficiary outranks arbitration oversight seating to retaliate, or negotiate quietly? I leaned in. Then said the sentence that shattered romance layer illusions, opened institutional oversight distrust, and confirmed what my husband didn't know when he divorced me. If they offer mediation first, it means my signature might reach farther than their shells hide. The better question was already glowing in the room. Who exactly just realized I could freeze architecture by procedure, not emotion? Because no empire fears a wife who screams. Empires fear a wife who files into arbitration elevation clusters carrying dormant injunction override rights the thieves thought stayed asleep. But sleeping legends don't roar. They escalate. And somewhere, someone had just realized the guest list at my family meeting was now irrelevant. Because the invitation list that mattered wasn't the people sitting at my table. It was the people whose eyes now needed to know whether my inheritance clearance made me beneficiary, or system threatening by signature elevation rights. And I was about to make sure the next name spoken on the board wasn't mine being audited in reverse. But the system auditing him for thinking I'd vanish quietly before the arbitration query cluster returned clearance update priority elevation rights I had inherited but never used. And now, the war didn't have a spouse narrator anymore. It had a surname auditor silently promoted into beneficiary level dangerous enough to make institutions ask questions instead of issue orders. And my next question wasn't a tear. It was a knife quietly waiting to be filed into the system that had no idea the person they tried to delete was above audit outlier threshold. But that threshold had just changed shape entirely. Because the moment someone steals thinking you aren't the trapdoor, trust audit responses turn into infrastructure bankruptcy. And I had just been promoted mid-divorce into someone the system was now watching not for compliance, but for collapse authorization. The first time the Helios Arbitration Board called, I didn't answer immediately. Not because I was scared. Because I needed to understand why they assumed I'd pick up at all. Their number appeared as private. No header. No country code. Just the implication that the line itself carried authority. Victor Hale warned me, when they dial, you don't just listen. You measure every pause, every syllable, every sentence fragment. The wrong reaction triggers an escalation you can't file against until it's already active. I picked up. A woman's voice, calm but sharper than a scalpel, greeted me. Mrs. Hale, congratulations. We've been expecting your acknowledgement. Expectation implies planning, I said cautiously. Are we congratulating the beneficiary? Or the system that assumed I would fold? She chuckled softly, the sound like porcelain clinking against steel. Both. But mostly the system. You've triggered a cascade it did not anticipate. Your maternal surname echoes, stronger than anticipated. I straightened in my chair. Maternal surname echoes. That's not a compliment in their lexicon. It's a warning flag in compliance oversight. So, I said, forcing calm, what exactly is the agenda here? Agenda, she replied, is secondary. Your husband, Mr. Roderick, has executed the transfers. Miss Maya has attempted to intercept the risk. But your activation of the hail clearance tree, without collateral exposure yet, has introduced an unforeseen variable into our supervisory cluster. I held the phone tighter. Variable? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Exactly, she said. A variable capable of escalating mediation precedents above our secondary partners. I inhaled slowly, letting the words sink. This was no longer about money. This was hierarchy, authority, signature-level disruption. And now? I asked. Now, she said, we need to establish terms. Not for negotiation. Not for courtesy. But for containment. Because variables that can escalate clearance rights mid-procedural audit are dangerous. I let the word dangerous resonate. She continued, you're invited to a preliminary arbitration meeting. Attendance is not optional. It is acknowledgement. Failure to appear may trigger automatic escalation protocols. I paused. Automatic escalation. That's not a bluff. That's infrastructure threat language. So, I said, steadying my tone, you want me in a room I didn't know existed, speaking with people I didn't know were tracking my grandmother's legacy, because my husband assumed I'd vanish? Precisely, she replied. But also, Mrs. Hale, the meeting is not for your husband's benefit. It is to determine whether your signature may inadvertently freeze assets that have no owner yet, and to ensure proper authority routing before procedural damage occurs. I exhaled, feeling the weight of invisible eyes. This was bigger than him, bigger than Maya, bigger than my drained account. You're essentially asking me to acknowledge that I may legally override structures they assumed safe? I asked. Yes, she said. But cautiously. Every step you take will be monitored. Every declaration will be compared against dormant clauses. Every question you ask will be evaluated for procedural risk. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, mind calculating. If I moved too fast, I could expose myself. If I moved too slow, they might assume hesitation equals weakness. And yet, the exhilaration crept in. This was no longer a divorce story. This was a signature-level chessboard, and I had just sat at the first square. Prepare, she said, almost gently. Your next communication will confirm timing. Until then, remember, every misstep, every overreaction, is logged. The system doesn't forgive surprise. Click. I placed the phone down, staring at the ceiling. The room didn't feel safe. It felt strategic. Every window, every reflection, every object in my house was suddenly a potential witness. Not to me. To my signature. I had one thought racing through my mind. If I can elevate my status here faster than they anticipate, how many of their next moves can I legally counter before anyone else notices I'm holding the ledger? Because they assumed the wife was gone. They didn't know the auditor had already taken her seat. And auditors don't scream. Auditors reallocate authority. And I was ready. But I also knew this, escalation has a cost. Who exactly is watching me in the shadows, waiting for the first procedural misstep, and how many of their shells will fall before I even speak my first word at arbitration? The message arrived at 2:17 a.m. Not an email. Not a letter. Not even a notification window like before. It was a single-line SMS that appeared on my offline companion phone, the one the board somehow knew existed, even though it had no SIM active, no internet, no network ping. The only possible explanation was terrifying. They didn't send it through carriers. They injected it through device registry access. The text didn't greet me. No formalities. No signatures. It just said, Window 0500 to 0610. Vienna Arbitration Annex Dress Neutral. Bring only the name you wish to defend. Neutral dress. Bring only the name. Not documents. Not evidence. Not proof of theft or divorce or conspiracy. Just my name. Just the thing that had triggered everything in the first place. When powerful people don't ask for paperwork, it means the hearing isn't about facts. It means the hearing is about authority legitimacy. Victor was already awake when I forwarded him the line. I don't know if he slept at all. Strategic men don't sleep before escalation events. They sit in the silence doing invisible math. He stared at the message for a long time. These aren't instructions, he said. These are attendance acceptance preconditions. You're not going to defend the money. You're going to defend the right to file at the tier you just reached. What tier? I asked. He tapped the SMS screen. Tier 3. Data arbitration oversight deviation. You're walking into a room full of institutions, not individuals. This is no longer a legal fight. This is permissions warfare. If you speak as a wife, you lose. If you speak as a beneficiary, you survive. But if you speak as a clearance holder they didn't authorize, they freeze assets and summon tier enforcement. So what did that leave me? A third option. The dangerous one. Speak as someone who never asked for permission in the first place, but has the filing signature to move anyway. Because consortiums don't respect emotion. They respect leverage, but only when delivered in procedural syntax. I asked Victor something slowly. And if I don't want to defend the tier? If I want to expose it instead? His eyes sharpened. That's the forbidden branch. You don't expose a consortium hearing until after arbitration closes. Otherwise you activate cancel protocols. Cancel protocols aren't lawsuits. They're disappearances. Disappearances. The kind that don't hit news. The kind that don't trigger courts. The kind where someone deletes a device handshake and the person attached quietly falls out of jurisdiction. I realized something chilling in that moment, something I had ignored before in all the emotional debris. They weren't monitoring me for my next legal move. They were monitoring me for my next identity declaration. Because right now, to them, I wasn't even officially a person on the board. I was a rogue signature with a beneficiary tag they had not approved in routing. But they still invited me. Which meant one thing. They don't invite you because they fear you. They invite you because they fear what you might accidentally override if you stay unarbitrated. The theft was contained. The divorce was irrelevant. The joint account was already a footnote. The whale under the ocean they cared about was. White heavy checkmark, could I freeze corporate asset trees? White heavy checkmark, could I file audit interruption motions? White heavy checkmark, could my surname chain carry clearance above secondary shell routing? White heavy checkmark, and most dangerous. Would I speak like someone who knows the system, or someone who wants to burn it? And even though they warned me not to misstep, the message itself was a misstep on their side. Because if they knew about my offline phone, my registry tree, my grandmother's clauses, the transfers, Maya's interception, then they also know I've already started investigation. Which meant their surveillance was now defensive, not offensive. I packed quietly before dawn. No dramatic soundtrack. No cinematic montage. My house was already cinematic enough. The irony? The meeting didn't ask me to bring proof. It asked me to bring choice. Not choice of rebuttal, but choice of identity. Because systems expect lawsuits. They do not expect self-recognition. When I walked toward the window, putting my coat on, I whispered a line to myself I never thought I'd say at 34 years old. You wanted me silent in divorce. Now I'll be silent in attendance. And loud only when your architecture trembles. But before I even left the house, a new realization snapped into place like a seatbelt clicking into metal teeth. If the Vienna Arbitration Annex only wants the name I defend, then someone in that room plans to challenge whether it should even exist in their ledger. Which person exactly wants to test the strength of a grandmother I never met, And how fast will their shell burn when I pick the wrong identity to their surprise? I shut the door behind me. Not heavy. Not light. Unmeasured. And that itself was a statement. I expected the room to be intimidating. I didn't expect it to be empty. No chairs. No folders. No personnel. Just a long obsidian black arbitration table floating in the center like a weaponized runway. The walls were curved glass, polished to reflect anyone who walked in from every angle, every height, every direction. Not for aesthetics, for signature triangulation. The moment I stepped inside, lights embedded into the table flickered awake, scanning upward like they were reading my silhouette before my face. A voice filled the room through no speaker I could locate. Beneficiary hail. Confirmation received. Stand by for identity validation. Not Mrs. Hale. Not Sarah. Not ma'am. Beneficiary. The only label systems respect before scrutiny starts. A rectangular panel opened on the obsidian surface, projecting nothing but a blinking cursor, no questions written, no prompts, no guidance. Victor had warned me about this very moment. When a system gives you a cursor, it means your next words write your clearance. Or erase it. I put my palms on the cold obsidian. Not weak. Not tense. Deliberate. Then I spoke into the blinking void as calmly as someone disarming a bomb without instructions. Validate the path, not the title. The cursor froze for exactly 1 second. Then more text appeared, typed by the system itself. Path requested. Title rejected. Surname tree now under scrutiny. The glass walls shimmered softly as lines of light ran upward through the architecture like roots crawling toward a sun that could burn them. Another voice, this time male, not neutral, materialized from the glass curve like he had been waiting behind the reflection. A man in a graphite suit, hair silver, jaw authority sharp. You were advised to speak like a wife who lost money, he said, not like a beneficiary who wants to examine paths. Now you've changed the nature of the hearing. Changed the hearing. Not the case. Not the evidence. The hearing itself. I didn't look at him directly. I looked at his reflection, because reflections don't lie about who's participating. Hearing changed the morning you routed money through my offline device, I said quietly. I'm just confirming who stands on the sending branch. His reflection rippled like water disturbed by something heavy dropped without warning. Then the system wrote again. Secondary shell router confirmed. But load-bearing authority remains unknown. Load-bearing authority. That phrase doesn't refer to one man. It refers to the pillar that stabilizes everyone else's ability to move money without oversight. The man's expression hardened, but only after the system said it first, which means he didn't speak from ego anymore, he was speaking from defensive authority alignment. He leaned in, tone low. This hearing wasn't to mediate your husband's theft. It was to ensure your clearance does not collide with dormant consortium asset trees. We challenge legitimacy of surnames that shouldn't have filing momentum. Momentum again. The one threat they kept circling without stating outright. So challenge it, I said quietly. The silence hit differently this time. Not fearful. Transactional. Because when someone challenges your name in rooms like this, they check for 2 things. Do you push back emotionally? Or do you push back with syntax? I spoke again, but this time like someone signing invisible architecture documents with spoken authority. Cascade acknowledged. Arbitration accepted. Clearance unrequested, but not unowned. The system blinked. Clearance unowned now owned. Pivot legitimacy accepted. Surname tree cannot be frozen without causal exposure. Which means they can't silence me without exposing themselves. And systems don't risk self-exposure before shell elevation completes. The man exhaled. Then bowed almost imperceptibly, not to me, but to the fact that I had validated my own legitimacy faster than they could challenge it. "One more question," he said quietly. "The dangerous one now that you've secured your seat in architecture." I lifted my chin slightly. He asked, "If you are now beneficiary, not wife, whose side do you file against? The courier or the senders?" And there it was. The dragon-mouth question they had been steering me toward from the moment the first phone dial shadowed itself in my home. I smiled slightly. Not triumph. Not defeat. A third thing. "I file," I said quietly, where the load-bearing authority trembles first. The system went dark. The cursor vanished. Not because it ended, but because the next phase wouldn't be about declaring identity anymore. It would be about declaring targets. And someone in that invisible network already knows I won't strike the courier I married. I'll strike the ones who wrote the send function itself. Which means the real villain wasn't in the room at all. It was listening to my house keys jingle on the exit sensor as I walked out. And systems don't scream, but the people who own them do, when they finally learn the beneficiary wasn't the one in danger. Their ledger was. People think revenge begins with a shout, a slap, a confrontation in the rain. But real revenge begins in silence. The kind that ends eras. After the Vienna Arbitration Annex hearing, I stopped imagining myself as a wounded spouse in a collapsing life. That role had served its purpose. The system had tasted my name, tested its weight, and failed to smother it. Now came the phase that actually mattered. Filing. Momentum. Target assignment. Victor met me at 5:22 a.m. in an underground document war room owned by the Hale Family Legal Trust, a structure far less public than banks, but far more lethal in consequence delivery. No windows. No reflections. No black tables. Just rows of filing servers humming like sleeping engines waiting for ignition. Victor didn't ask if I was ready. He asked which branch the motion should hit first. Branch 1, the courier. Easy. Clean. Emotionally satisfying. But structurally useless. Branch 2, the senders above clearance oversight. Messier. Louder. Riskier. But when those collapse, entire empires shake sideways. I pointed at Branch 2 without hesitation. His stylus paused mid-air, the only show of surprise I had received that morning that felt human. "You understand," he said quietly, "that filing against senders invokes audit exposure momentum, asset origin legitimacy interrogation, and enforcement attention. This summons stakeholders from under rocks you have not rattled yet." Good. Because couriers apologize. Stakeholders retaliate. And retaliation exposes shape. My first motion was prepared under a special statute only families like mine ever learn exists. Unified Asset Origination Disclosure Order. A filing key that forces asset trails to reveal origin owners above shared access placeholders, even if the frontline executor was someone you used to eat breakfast with. The abolition of personal blame is the birth of structural confession. When my lawyer sent the document across the Hale servers, the cascading effect was instant, unstoppable, merciless, and beautiful. White heavy checkmark first the routing codes froze. White heavy checkmark then the shell permissions flagged red. White heavy checkmark then dormant assets blinked awake like wounded animals. White heavy checkmark then the system had no choice but to acknowledge that my surname chain had filing precedence by blood, not marriage. Which means they could disapprove my husband's theft, but they couldn't disapprove who owned the authority to interrogate it. I wasn't filing to win sympathy. I was filing to alter the enemy roster. Because once you accuse a structure instead of a man, the only possible outcomes are: it collapses under inquiry. Or it fights back and shows its face. This part summary? We were living option 2. At 6:03 a.m., a fresh stakeholder signature request alarm pinged across the Hale Trust terminals. 4 separate private channels activated simultaneously, not just banks, but regulatory oversight nodes tied to financial arbitration governance. Names weren't displayed. Systems don't broadcast names. They broadcast heat signatures. Victor said quietly, "They're waking up because you filed at a tier higher than expected. And that means they now need to identify the architect responsible for your deviation, or find the authority pillar that protects them if they choose to counterfile." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I already knew. They fear exposure. But now they also fear who protects exposure from them. I asked Victor a question that sounded insane, until you realize insanity is just strategy without witnesses. What if I file the next motion not just to disclose, but to reallocate legitimacy to an owner the system can't audit against, even if it wants to? Victor smirked. The only owners above system auditability are sovereign clearance directories, ghosts with signatures. Families, not institutions. If you do that, you don't trigger arbitration anymore. You trigger jurisdictional surrender or escalation warfare. Exactly. Because here's the truth my husband never learned while draining my account through system templates. Systems expect lawsuits. They don't expect beneficiaries who file to change who the lawsuit must fear. And that means somewhere above boardrooms and glass tables, someone has just realized 2 things simultaneously. The wife didn't file because she was wronged. The beneficiary filed because the system is wrong. Which means the courier was the bait. The senders are the prey. And prey doesn't know it's prey. Until the next filing drops without greeting. I crossed my arms. Victor waited. The servers hummed louder. The next motion was ready. But so were their counters. From a tier that finally recognizes the deviation carries a name that can challenge eras instead of trying to survive them. And my next words weren't going to defend love or money anymore. They were going to decide whose infrastructure collapses first when the world finally learns I filed against a system, not a man. I never believed silence protected the innocent. Silence protects the unprepared. At 6:41 a.m., while the rest of the world was boiling coffee and scrolling news, the thing I had been waiting for finally arrived, not an email, not a courier, not an attorney stamp packet. Just a secure encrypted voice memo delivered through the Helios Clearance Directory channel. Systems don't send voice memos unless they expect the recipient to be dead, helpless, or contained. They were wrong 3 times in the same story. I tapped play. A filtered male voice spoke, modulated to sound calm, but calm in these networks is just fear holding its breath. You've requested asset origination exposure. Ambitious. But now your next motion threatens governance collision. You will attend the Hale Sovereign Jurisdiction Archive by 5:05 p.m. today. Do not involve arbitration press. Recognition is preferred over conflict. Until your attendance, clearance operations involving your dissolved husband will remain paused for evaluation. Paused. Not cancelled. Not denied. Paused means they were still trying to calculate jurisdiction dominance. I forwarded the memo to Victor without reacting emotionally. He appreciated that. Emotional reactions are how consortiums find cracks to peel open. I wasn't giving them a seam, I was giving them a wall. Victor paced slowly. Recognition preferred, he said, almost amused. That means they realized this isn't a marriage retaliation event. This is a clearance legitimacy confrontation. They're basically checking whether the archive owns you, or if you entered visibility illegally. Visibility illegally. They didn't fear what I'd say about theft. They feared what my name might do to asset trees if I didn't appear to be properly owned. Ownership of a name is different inside clearance networks. Normal law tracks liability. But inside these rooms, the real fear is who has the authority to summon oversight. And after this voice memo, the roster expanded again without mercy. White heavy checkmark because filing exposed shells. White heavy checkmark investigation alerted archive oversight. White heavy checkmark attendance request activated visibility monitoring. White heavy checkmark and now tertiary stakeholders were probably pulling internal stakes out of documents cabinets. Not to defend my divorce, but to defend their future from my surname momentum. I checked the clock. Attendance window, 5:05 p.m. Which meant I had about 10 hours before I walked into a room that held more family secrets than affection and more infrastructure leverage than any bank lawsuit clause thread. But 10 hours is enough time for one more tactical spike if delivered in syntax instead of behavior. I should file again, I said. Victor stopped pacing. No, he corrected, you should file only if it forces a higher tier to appear earlier than they want. Exactly. Summon, unless summoned. I logged into the Hale servers, generated a motion request packet under Tier 4 Legitimacy Interrogation Statute, and authorized it through the Sovereign Family Clearance Tree owned by the Eleanor Hale. The name I had never spoken, until now. If arbitration rooms have black glass tables, Tier 4 filing rooms have families that rule shadows. I was asking a system to audit itself against a grandmother it can't challenge without exposing itself. Victor whispered. You just threw a procedural challenge at a tier that has no public reply mechanism. They'll either surrender ownership calculation or accelerate confrontation to see who empowered you. Accelerate confrontation. Good. Because that means my next conflict appearance wouldn't be scheduled when they wanted it. It would be scheduled when they feared delaying it further. 7:09 a.m., filing sent. 7:09 and 3 seconds a.m., clearance accepted by the server. 7:10 a.m., first tertiary stakeholder supervision ping activated. Within 1 minute, private governance nodes started waking up like digital alarms I was not supposed to see. The archive thought it was summoning me to validate legitimacy. But my motion had just summoned them into early recognition mode instead, and systems lose stealth when beneficiaries move faster. Now attendance was theirs too. Not just mine. Victor raised an eyebrow. When you reach sovereign surname interrogation, you don't just get divorce justice, you get institutional attention. Someone in the Helios chain is now asking, is she a rogue signature, or part of an older tree we cannot audit without collapse? Collapse. That word tastes sweet when it shifts from threat to opportunity. I packed my coat again, neutral dress as ordered, but my posture had changed. I wasn't attending as a wife who lost a marriage or money. I was attending as a visibility anomaly they could not freeze without causal exposure. And causal exposure defeats shell operators faster than lawsuits. Because emotion is personal. Clearance is imperial. And imperial collapse screams differently. Somewhere, someone was typing in a room earlier than scheduled. Who gave her the right to summon my audit tier backward? Backward momentum hits harder than forward momentum. And backward momentum had just announced my existence at the archive before I even entered the building. Not bad for someone who got divorced by SMS. Not bad for someone whose account was drained by a husband acting as a courier. Because they thought divorce closed stories. They didn't know divorce had just opened me as a jurisdictional enemy rewrite engine. And they were finally becoming afraid. Of the one thing I actually control. What tier fears me next? I arrived at 4:59 p.m. at the gold-trimmed iron doors of the Hale Sovereign Jurisdiction Archive. Not early. Not late. Deliberate. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air felt different, colder than obsidian, heavier than signatures, quieter than guilt. This wasn't a courtroom. Courtrooms judge liability. This was a jurisdiction-rooted identity gauntlet, where the central question isn't what happened but who is authorized to matter while it happens. The room wasn't empty this time. It was waiting. 7 figures sat at a circular archive dais, draped in neutral slate ceremonial robes owned by the Upper Clearance Lexicon Council. No emotion. No dramatic tempo. Stillness that felt like a sword resting on velvet, not swinging yet. The center chair was occupied by a man with silver-white hair braided into an old authoritative pattern. That pattern was older than this hearing. That braid meant lineage clearance, not modern network privilege. He spoke first, eyes steady but not calm. Beneficiary hail. We challenge origination of your procedural momentum. State the name carrying your clearance. Victor had coached me for the line. I didn't repeat my husband's surname. I didn't assert my given name. I declared the only clearance that could not be audited without cascading structural collapse. Eleanor Hale authorized my legitimacy. A murmur rippled through the glass acoustics of the chamber, not loud but visible. Systems tremble like data strings, not like people. A tablet awakened at the center of the dais, projecting a lineage tree that glowed in amber gradients of interrogation. The braiding man continued. This name holds audit immunity. But immunity does not excuse disruption. You filed a Tier 4 motion before verification. Do you assert filing ownership or accidental collision? I smiled, softly but sharply. Accidental collision is how systems apologize, I said quietly. Ownership is how eras end. I assert filing ownership, the rest can record themselves accordingly. The chamber paused for a heartbeat, but not my heartbeat. Heartbeat is emotional. This pause was procedural processing shock. The most senior council member, a woman whose identity tag flashed beside her reflection like a warning, not a compliment, leaned forward slightly. Do you understand the consequences of direct ownership declaration at sovereign archive level? She asked. I do, I replied. That's why I filed it in silence instead of anger. If you want to measure a collapse, you don't shake hands, you shake architecture. Another ripple. Not personal offense. Infrastructure recognition event flagged earlier than planned. One of the younger council figures finally cracked the silence with the mistake systems make when ego outruns protocol. You think your family legacy scares us more than your husband's theft? I turned to his reflection and answered with a line that was neither emotional nor neutral. It was lethal. My husband's theft was the distraction your system relied on. My surname's authority is the thing your era never prepared to exist on the receiving end of a filing order. The amber light flickered violently, error recognition spike, lineage tree forced into self-illumination. White heavy checkmark my husband drained an account. White heavy checkmark I drained their stealth. White heavy checkmark they challenged a spouse. White heavy checkmark I challenged a clearance route, the unbeautiful load-bearing wall of their operational quiet. The braiding man exhaled slowly and finally spoke the line that confirmed the shift I had been building motion by motion. Legitimacy confirmed. Filing authority cannot be frozen. Arbitration dissolved from spouse tier. Hearing now elevated to infrastructure-level disclosure risk. I laughed softly. Because here's the truth systems hate admitting. You can drain a joint bank account. You cannot drain someone who carries a surname capable of dragging your era into identity compliance hearings before war even begins. The circle didn't close. It transformed. My husband didn't realize who he married. But the consortium did. Not because they respect me. But because they cannot audit sovereign filing ownership without collapsing the shells they thought protected them. And I had just spoken the name that makes systems log fear, not dismissal. Recipient not for mediation. Recipient for recognition. Recipient for consequence. Then the system pinged its final internal loop conclusion without emotion. Error visibility no longer safe. Deviation validated. Oversight inverted. Which means the real revenge I filed wasn't against a man, a divorce clause, a transaction, or a betrayal. It was against their assumption that beneficiaries don't raid architecture, and wives don't rewrite enemy rosters. I walked out of the annex not just with justice, but with the thing systems can never repossess once you confirm ownership aloud. Impact. Recognition. And the power to choose which ledger burns next.